Curiosity had always been a dangerous thing on the frontier. It had led men into mines that collapsed, women into marriages that bruised, and dreamers into deserts where only ghosts remembered their names. Yet tonight, as snow whispered over the wide Wyoming plains, curiosity stirred again, quiet and human, in the heart of a man who had long believed himself past such feelings. Jonas Calloway stood by the window of his ranch house, watching the storm erase the world. The panes trembled with the wind's moan, and the lamplight quivered across his lined face. He was 40 years old, a number that felt heavier than the years themselves. His body was still strong, broad shoulders, sure hands, but inside he carried a tiredness that no sleep could mend. He had lived too many winters alone, and the silence had become a kind of companion, one that demanded nothing but gave nothing in return. His cattle were penned, his fields buried, his chores done. There should have been comfort in that certainty, yet something restless gnawed at him. The clock ticked steady. The fire sighed. He poured himself a cup of coffee gone lukewarm and wondered, not for the first time, what it might feel like to have a voice answer his good night. The thought embarrassed him. A man his age ought not to ache for such things. Love belonged to the young and foolish, those who hadn't yet learned how the world wore down tenderness. He turned from the window, but a flicker of motion caught his eye, something pale against the storm's darkness. He blinked, leaned closer. There, far across the whitened pasture, a shape stumbled and fell. For a moment he thought it might be one of his strays, but no, too small, too human. Jonas swore softly, pulled on his coat, and stepped into the gale. The cold hit him like a slap. Snow rose to his knees, and each step felt like wading through time itself, slow, heavy, endless. He kept his lantern high, its light cutting short swaths through the blur. When he reached the figure, his breath caught. It was a woman. Her hair, matted with frost, clung to her face. Her lips were blue, her eyes half open but unfocused. "Ma'am?" he said, kneeling beside her. She didn't answer. He touched her shoulder. It was stiff with cold. Acting on instinct more than thought, he gathered her into his arms. She weighed little, as if the snow had already begun to claim her. "Hold on now," he muttered. "We ain't letting the night win this one." The ride back felt longer than it was. The wind roared so fiercely he couldn't hear his own horse's hooves. But at last the house loomed ahead, the lantern in the window flickering like a heartbeat. Inside, he laid her near the fire, stripped the wet cloak from her shoulders, and wrapped her in blankets. He worked in silence, boiling water, rubbing her hands, coaxing warmth into her limbs. Slowly, color returned to her cheeks. Her eyelids fluttered. "Where am I?" she whispered, voice thin as the wind. "You're safe," he said simply. "Calloway Ranch? You'll rest here till you're fit again." Her gaze drifted around the small room, the stacked firewood, the rough-hewn table, the lonely neatness of a man who lived without company. She tried to speak but winced. He poured her a cup of broth, lifted it carefully to her lips. She drank, trembled, then managed a weak smile. "My name's Clara," she said at last. "Clara Whitlow." Jonas nodded, unsure whether to offer his hand. "Jonas." Her eyes met his then, clear gray eyes that held both gratitude and shame. "I didn't mean to trespass," she murmured. "I was walking to town. Thought I could make it before the storm." "You'd have frozen half a mile more," he said. "You'll stay here till the weather breaks." "I can't pay you," she said quickly, voice rough with pride. He shrugged. "Don't need pay for doin' what's right." That night, as she slept on the cot near the fire, Jonas sat at the table sharpening a knife he didn't need to sharpen, trying to think of anything but the rise and fall of her breathing. She looked fragile, almost too young for the kind of exhaustion that rested on her face. 28 perhaps. Still young enough to hope, old enough to know disappointment. When morning came, she insisted on helping with chores. He protested, but she was stubborn. "I can't just sit idle," she said, pulling on borrowed gloves too large for her hands. She helped gather wood, fed the hens, even attempted to mend a bridle. Jonas watched her, secretly admiring her will. She was clumsy but determined, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold. Over the next few days, their rhythm settled into something gentle. She cooked while he worked the stables. In the evenings they shared supper, speaking little but listening much. Her laughter, soft, uncertain, filled the empty corners of his house. Yet with each passing day, the weight of what the town might say pressed heavier on him. He could already hear the gossip, Jonas Calloway keeping a woman under his roof through winter, alone. He told himself it didn't matter, but pride and habit made him colder than he meant to be. One night, when she thanked him again for saving her, he said curtly, "Anyone would have done the same." Her smile faltered, and he hated himself for the way her eyes dropped. Later, he found her sitting outside on the porch, the snow falling quiet around her. "Couldn't sleep," she said when he stepped out. "It's beautiful, the silence. I thought silence was always cruel, but here, it's almost kind." He leaned against the post beside her. "It can be both." She turned to him then, her face soft in the lantern glow. "You talk like a man who's been lonely a long time." He didn't answer. The truth of it lived in his bones. After a while, she said quietly, "I left a man I was supposed to marry. He wanted land, not a wife. Folks'll say I'm wicked for running. Maybe they're right." Jonas looked at her then, really looked, the way her fingers twisted in her lap, the tremor in her jaw as she fought not to cry. "Running don't make you wicked," he said. "It just means you wanted something different." Her eyes shimmered. "And what about you, Jonas? What did you want?" The question startled him. He opened his mouth, but no answer came. He hadn't asked himself that in years. When she went inside, he remained on the porch, staring at the tracks their boots had made in the snow. The wind had already begun to fill them in, erasing proof that anyone had stood there at all. By the time the storm cleared and the horizon glowed faintly gold, something within him had shifted, small, unspoken, but real. He found himself looking forward to her laughter, to the scent of bread baking, to the way her voice softened when she spoke his name. Yet each moment of warmth frightened him, for he knew how easily warmth could fade. Still, when she smiled at him that morning, her eyes bright against the silver sky, he felt something loosen in his chest. For the first time in years, the silence around him didn't feel like punishment. It felt like waiting for a world that might dare to bloom again, and though Jonas didn't yet understand it, the thaw had already begun. When the storm passed, the world outside shimmered with the kind of stillness that only follows survival. The snow lay untouched and clean, stretching in waves across the ranchland like a blank page. Jonas Calloway stepped outside with the morning light brushing against his face, the sharp air cutting through the edges of his thoughts. Behind him, inside the warm glow of the cabin, Clara Whitlow moved quietly, her shadow soft against the frosted window. She had been with him for nearly a week, yet every morning she still thanked him as though she hadn't earned her place beneath that roof. Jonas didn't know what to do with her gratitude. He'd never been anyone's hero, never sought to be. He'd simply done what decency demanded, what any man should have done when he found a stranger half buried in snow. But lately, when he saw the light catch her hair or the determination in her jaw as she mended the fence beside him, something unfamiliar stirred in his chest, a fragile warmth that made him both alive and uneasy. They worked together that morning without speaking much. She wore his old coat, its sleeves rolled up the wrists, and her breath clouded in the cold air. He noticed how her laughter came easier now, light as wind through grass, and how it slipped beneath his guard before he could stop it. The silence between them was no longer heavy, it was steady, like the beat of a heart rediscovering rhythm. But when he rode into town for supplies that afternoon, the peace began to fracture. The general store buzzed with gossip the moment he stepped through the door. The men by the stove fell silent, then one of them smirked. "Heard you got yourself some company out there, Calloway," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "Pretty little thing, too young for the snow, too old for mistakes." Jonas's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Another voice joined in, softer but crueler. "Ain't right, a man living alone with a woman under his roof. Folks are bound to talk." He kept his eyes on the counter as he paid for flour and kerosene. His hands were steady, but his chest burned. By the time he mounted his horse, the whispers had crawled beneath his skin like frostbite. The ride home felt longer than usual, and the mountains seemed sharper, the sky more mercilessly blue. When he returned, Clara was at the table, sewing the tear in her sleeve. She looked up and smiled, but the expression faltered when she saw his face. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing that needs saying," he replied too quickly. He busied himself with hanging his coat, avoiding her eyes. But she didn't move, didn't look away. "Someone said something, didn't they?" Her voice was soft, but it carried. Jonas exhaled, long and tired. "Doesn't matter what folks say. Always been their favorite pastime, judging what ain't theirs to understand." She set the needle down carefully. "They're talking about me, aren't they?" He didn't answer. Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. Finally, he turned toward her, his expression hard but pained. "You should leave when the road clears. You'll find work in town. A decent woman deserves a decent name, not one tied to a rancher twice her age." Clara flinched as though struck. "You think I care what they say?" "You should," he said gruffly. "This place, these people, they remember everything. You stay here long enough, they'll make sure your name never washes clean." Her eyes shimmered with anger and hurt. "You think I don't know shame? I've lived under it my whole life. But you—" She stopped herself, shaking her head. "You're not protecting me, Jonas. You're protecting yourself. You're scared to want something again." He turned away, but her words hit deep, deeper than she could know. For years he told himself love was a young man's folly, a game for hearts not yet bruised. But standing there, hearing her voice tremble with defiance, he realized fear had been his truest companion. That night, another storm rolled in, less fierce, but wild enough to shake the rafters. Jonas couldn't sleep. The wind rattled the shutters, and the firelight flickered over the walls like restless memories. He rose, meaning to check the barn, and found Clara already at the door, struggling to pull it shut against the wind. Her hair whipped loose around her face, and snow spun in dizzying circles around her. "Clara! Get inside!" he called, gripping her arm. She pulled free, her eyes fierce. "You keep trying to save me, Jonas, but you're the one drowning." He stared at her, snow melting on his lashes. "You don't know what you're saying, Dot." "Yes, I do." Her voice cracked, but she didn't look away. "You think being alone makes you strong, but it just makes you hollow. You tell me I deserve better, but maybe better is standing right in front of me, and he's too proud to see it." For a heartbeat, the world was nothing but the storm around them and the truth between them. Jonas's heart pounded with a pain that wasn't pain at all but something sharper, alive. He reached for her without thinking, his gloved hand finding her cheek, the skin cold but real beneath his touch. "I'm too old for love," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Then let me prove you wrong," she whispered. The wind howled, and the lantern beside them flared, its lights spilling golden across the snow. He drew her closer, and she didn't resist. When their foreheads touched, the world outside seemed to hush, as if even the storm had paused to listen. They stayed like that, wrapped in silence, until the fire inside the barn dimmed to embers. Jonas felt the weight of years slipping from his shoulders, years of regret, solitude, and fear. It wasn't youth that he'd lost all along, it was permission to hope. Clara had given it back to him without asking for anything in return. By morning, the storm had passed again, leaving the ranch bathed in pale sunlight. Jonas opened the door to a world remade, snow glittering like silver dust, fences shining with frost. Clara stepped beside him, wearing his old coat, her breath visible in the chill. For the first time, he didn't care who might see them. Down the road, two riders passed, glancing their way. Jonas met their eyes and nodded, unashamed. The men looked away first. Clara smiled faintly. "You think they'll stop talking?" "Let 'em talk," he said, slipping his hand into hers. "They'll find someone new soon enough." She laughed, soft and surprised, and the sound was warmer than the sun itself. He turned toward her, and for the first time, he kissed her, not out of loneliness, but out of recognition. When they parted, the air between them was full of quiet promise. The land stretched endless around them, yet somehow it felt smaller now, as though the world itself had drawn closer to watch. Jonas looked at her and felt no fear, only peace, the kind that comes when a man finally stops fighting his own heart. The snow began to fall again, light and slow, as if the sky itself approved. Jonas thought of all the years he'd wasted waiting for the right season, never realizing that spring could come even in winter, if only he opened the door to it. He squeezed Clara's hand gently. "Guess I'm not too old after all," he murmured. She smiled, her eyes bright as the morning. "You never were. You just forgot how it felt to be found." And as they walked together across the glittering white field, their footprints side by side, the lonely man and the runaway woman disappeared into the golden edge of the day. Two souls no longer afraid of warmth, or of what it might bring next.